For most of its history, auto racing was dominated by the experienced. Drivers in the top echelons of motorsports had worked their way into those rides by proving themselves time and time again in the lower divisions. The idea of a generational talent who could just be dropped into any car and go fast is a relatively new concept. As recently as the early 1990s, if you wanted to race in the NASCAR Cup Series, you'd probably be in your late 20s by the time you got your first full-time ride. And even then, you weren't expected to come out guns blazing until you were in your 30s. The idea was racing was more about accrued skill than raw talent. But then along came a kid named Jeff Gordon. Jeff caught the eyes of a lot of drivers and car owners. Even NASCAR legend Buck Baker, who had been racing in the Cup Series since day one back in 1949, called out his talents. But it was Rick Hendrick who nabbed the California kid and gave him his first start in 1992 at Atlanta Motor Speedway. At the time, Jeff was just 21 years old and was already announced to go full-time next year in 1993. That year, he won his Daytona qualifying race, and the year after, he won his first race at age 22 at the Coca-Cola 600. Before he was 30, he had amassed 55 wins and 3 championships. That was simply not done back then. He had changed everything. The young guns that came afterwards, like Kyle Larson, Christopher Bell, and Kyle Busch, got started so early because of him. He opened the door to a whole slew of young drivers and never shut it behind him. Thus, the average age of the field has been dropping ever since. But while Jeff was making his first start in 1992, another driver had just recently gotten his final win. They shared the same asphalt for a couple of years, and then at the end of the 94 season, just as Gordon got his first wins, he called it a career and hung up his fire suit. When he did so, he was 3 years older than Jeff Gordon is right now. And keep in mind, Jeff Gordon has been retired from racing since 2016. He was truly the last vanguard of the old way, a man who took his licks and worked his way all the way to the top on nothing but skill, talent, and reputation. He had earned a plethora of nicknames along the way, but one stuck out above all the others. Let's travel up to Taylorsville, North Carolina, and get to know Handsome Harry Gant a little bit better. Born in January of 1940, Harry Gant had a very influential first few years of his life. His father was in the Navy, so he lived with his grandma for most of his childhood. During the war years, his family, like every other family at the time, learned how to make the most out of their wartime rations. They stretched every meal and every tool to the absolute limits. Though these were his formative years, that mindset left a huge impression on him, and he never really did unlearn it. When the war was over, production of commercial vehicles resumed, and all those old beat-up coupes of the early 40s were bought up by GIs with nothing better to do on the weekends than go racing. Gant described Main Street of Taylorsville being inundated with race cars. Back then, stock cars really were stock, so guys would just drive them back and forth from the racetrack over in Hickory and back into town. He said it seemed like every single person in the town had a race car, and he knew immediately that was the only thing he wanted to do in life. By the time he was old enough to hold down a job, he and some buddies pulled together their money and built a hobby stock to race over at Hickory Motor Speedway. For his number, Harry Gant chose 77, in honor of a neighbor of his that used to street race on dirt roads around his house in a 37 Ford Coupe. He even painted the car the same, solid red with gold numbers. In 1962, the 22-year-old set off racing in the hobby stock division at Hickory, just like his idols did, and he immediately found success. By 1965, he had the Hobby Stock Championship and set his eyes on the NASCAR Late Model Sportsman division, the precursor to the Xfinity Series today. Back then, the Sportsman division was a southeastern regional series that mostly regulated itself to dirt and paved short tracks, with a few ventures onto bigger tracks. But the field of guys back then was stacked. Ralph Earnhardt, Ned Setzer, Tommy Houston, and Morgan Shepherd, just to name a few. If Harry was to move up to the top division, he was going to have to beat local living legends, and he did. He won the Hickory Track Championship in 1969 and finished second in the Sportsman Series title race, and then rattled off 3 Sportsman titles in a row from 1972 to 1974. And as luck would have it, while he was pulling off these heroics, another NASCAR legend had gotten into the track ownership game. Two-time Cup Series champion Ned Jarrett had retired at the end of the '66 season and bought Hickory Motor Speedway. So while Harry Gant was winning all these races, the man handing him the trophies and the checks had deep ties with lots of people in NASCAR. When longtime car owner Junie Donlevy told Ned that he had an open ride for a Winston Cup race at Charlotte in 1973, well, Ned knew just the right man to call. Harry Gant was tapped for the race and met up with the team to do some testing sessions first. They unload at Charlotte Motor Speedway and Junie tells Harry, just go out there, feel it out, shake it down, give us one flying lap so we can do a spark plug check. Harry says, alright, you got it, and straps up. His sportsman car motor usually wound up to about 8,000 RPM, so Harry just assumed the big 429 cubic inch Cup car motor could do even better. He ran about 5 laps puttering around at 7,000 RPM, and then floored it for the flying lap, but was disappointed to find out that he could only get another 200 RPM out of it. Harry didn't realize that a motor that big is meant to top out at 7,000. He was literally pushing the motor to its absolute limits. If he had done 8,000, he would have blown the motor. He brings it into the pits, and some of the crew members look kind of worried. Junie simply walks over silently, folds his arms over the roof of the car, shakes his head, and says, "Well, Harry, when you shake it down, you certainly do shake it down." But Harry still got the job, qualified 17th of 41 starters, and finished 11th. Not too bad for a 33-year-old making his first top division start. He dabbled in a few more races with varying results, but to his credit, he always finished the race and brought the car home in one piece. At a time when parts would seemingly break on a whim, he was always taking care of his equipment. In 1979, he sets out on his first full-time campaign, racing for Race Hill Farms in the number 47, a team with a modicum of success but hadn't won yet. However, Harry Gant at age 39 had accidentally walked into the most stacked rookie class of all time. Dale Earnhardt, Terry Labonte, and Jeff Bodine are all running races this year. And going into the future in the 80s and 90s, they will amass an insane number of wins and championships. But right now, Harry just wants to prove that he's still got what it takes to run against these 20-year-olds. He wins 1 pole position, has an average finish of 18.7, and 5 top 10s, which is pretty impressive considering that he had 12 DNFs that year, although they were all part failures. Going into the 1981 season, Harry's still with the same team, but they have improved massively and now have some top 5s to show for it. But early in the season, Harry gets a call from a team that was all the rage that year, Hal Needham and Burt Reynolds' Skull Bandit team. Yeah, that Burt Reynolds. Originally, they had tapped Stan Barrett, famed Hollywood stuntman, to drive the car, and Harry's just here to test drive for them since they both drive for the same manufacturer. But this is still a huge opportunity. This team was a massive deal at the time. It truly was a Hollywood meets NASCAR moment, and they had deep pockets. Harry hops in the car and notices a bunch of wires going everywhere. The team had onboard telemetry and an HP computer giving the teams real-time readouts of all sorts of data. Remember, this is 1981 and they were doing this. As a matter of fact, this was actually the first time Harry had even seen a computer, and they had to explain to him what it did. This team has serious money and knows how to spend it. And they weren't just using this during testing, they used this during actual races. And they're the reason why onboard telemetry is banned now, because NASCAR didn't want costs to spiral out of control. Harry Gant knows this is the next big thing in racing, and just 8 races into the 1981, he jumps ship and winds up racing the legendary number 33 Skull Bandit, a ride he'd keep for the rest of his career. Majority team owner Hal Needham was as flashy and flamboyant as his Hollywood partners, and called Harry Gant Handsome Harry, because of what he called his Hollywood good looks. But Harry was a quiet, soft-spoken guy who avoided media like the plague. He preferred to let his racing out on the track speak for itself. But one day some TV people are asking Hal where his star driver is, and he has to track down Harry to the trailer. He sits Harry down and explains to him, "If you're not in front of a camera, then you had best go find one to get in front of. And make sure you're wearing that Skull Bandit cap when you do. Those people paid us a lot of money to be here." After that conversation, Harry found himself feeling a lot more comfortable in front of the camera and with a microphone in his face. That season, he had the best run of his career up to that point with 3 poles, 13 top 5s, and a staggering 5 second-place finishes, good enough for 3rd in the year in point standings. In 1982, he gets win number 1 and 2. The first at Martinsville, a short track like what he grew up racing at, and the second at Charlotte, where it all began for him. Handsome Harry Gant isn't just a nice guy with a cool car and a cool team. He's legitimately one of the best guys in the sport, at age 42. Remember, even for the time, that was seen as a pretty old age to be hitting your peak. But he was far from actually hitting his highest of highs. And while he was out there winning races and competing for championships, he even got to be in movies. Thanks to the Hollywood connections of the Bandit team, Harry Gant found himself in the movies Stroker Ace and Cannonball Run as an extra, and he even had a speaking role one time.
Hi. I was wondering if you gentlemen would be kind enough to help me with my luggage.
Man, those 3 broads got a case of the uglies.
Let the boss hear you say that.
Hey, it's not much, but it's a hell of a lot more than what you or me could claim to have done, and all of this is being pulled off by a simple guy from Taylorsville, North Carolina, who would widely be considered past his prime when he started back in 1979. The team rattles off a bunch of wins, but begins to stagnate in the late 80s. In 1989, Hal Needham sells his team to Leo Jackson, and longtime crew chief Travis Carter is replaced by young Andy Petrie. And then they started cooking. After going winless for 3 years, they get 1 win in 1989, another in 1990, and 1 more in 1991 that scores Harry Gant a record that still stands today. At age 51 years and 116 days of age, Harry Gant became the oldest driver ever to win in the NASCAR Cup Series. But he wasn't done. He was going to add to it several more times. Okay, for those of you in the know, this is the moment you've been waiting for. This was Harry Gant's best statistical season, and what he pulled off late in the year is still talked about today. So let's talk about how Hollywood Harry Gant earned another nickname, Mr. September. Starting off on September the 1st, Harry Gant rolls off 5th, and after avoiding several close calls, he leads the most laps on the day, 152 of 367, and nabs his second Southern 500 victory ever. Just 6 days later, Saturday night under the lights in Richmond, Virginia, Harry Gant chases down a dominant Davey Allison and snookers a win from the Crown Prince. For the first time in his Cup career, Harry Gant has won back-to-back races, but he's not done yet. Not at all. September 15th, Dover, Delaware, after a grueling 4.5-hour-long 500-lap race at the Monster Mile, only 16 cars finished the race out of 40 starters, and Harry Gant laps the field for just the second time in his career. And the win was never in doubt either. He absolutely crushed them that day, leading 326 of 500 laps. Dover was far and away one of his best tracks. He racked up 4 wins there across his career. Harry Gant has now entered an elite group of NASCAR drivers who have won 3 races in a row, and now going into Martinsville on the 22nd, he stands to do something that no one has done in 5 years, win 4 in a row. This is another one of his best tracks. He scored his first win here, and the dub seems all but assured. But on a lap 376 restart, Rusty Wallace tries to be a hero and sends it into turn 3 way too hot, wrecking himself and Gant. Morgan Shepherd, one of Gant's Hickory rivals from back in the day, slams into him during the melee, and it looks like Gant's done. His crew are trying to fix the car without going a lap down, but the car is a mess. Benny Parsons, up in the booth, has this to say.
Looks like that right front tire is going south and the car's going north. I mean, there's pretty heavy damage to that car. So Harry Gant will not win his 4th in a row.
Uh-oh, Benny, you jinxed it. You shouldn't have said that. Mechanically speaking, there is nothing wrong with Gant's car. It drives just fine, just the body's messed up. The Skull Bandits just need to clear the sheet metal away from the wheels so they don't cut a tire. They cut the bodywork with saws, beat on the fenders with pipes and bats, but they get it squared away and send Handsome Harry Gant back on his way. On lap 448, he's back and takes the lead from Brett Bodine. He'll lead the last 47 laps with no interruption and walk away with the W. People are already calling him Mr. September by this point, but he was in position to go for an insane 5th win in a row at North Wilkesboro on September 29th. But a soft brake pedal would see victory narrowly slip away from him. He finished 2nd that day, but that didn't matter to the NASCAR nation. He had earned the moniker of Mr. September, and to this day, if you mention the name Harry Gant, everyone always responds with, "Oh yeah, Mr. September, right? The time he won 4 races in a row. Crazy." It was his most prestigious achievement, and he did this in his 50s. What a mad lad. In 1992, Gant racks up another 2 wins with the final win of his career coming at Michigan on a fuel mileage call. That record still stands as the oldest driver to have ever won a Cup Series race and will likely never be touched. 52 years and 219 days old. Going into the final race of the season, the fateful Hooters 500 in Atlanta, Gant is mathematically eligible for the championship along with 5 other drivers. It's going to be a straight-up slugfest down there, but Harry has the flu that weekend, and basically needs everyone ahead of him in the points to wreck out early to have any shot at the Cup. He has a relief driver ready, but Harry actually does all 500 miles without a driver change. He and other drivers have described the sweltering heat inside of a race car as almost therapeutic. It's basically like a sauna where you can sweat out all of the toxins in your body. Harry brings it home in 13th in the race and 4th in the standings. Not too bad for a man who was seen to be in the twilight of his career. But as the team celebrates with their year-end party, Andy Petrie announces that he will be leaving the team to join Richard Childress Racing and become the crew chief for Dale Earnhardt. It was a shock to the team because Harry wasn't even considering retirement at that point, and actually felt like he had another shot at the Cup in '93. But without Petrie's wizardry in the shop, it takes the wind out of the team's sails. Harry is still impressive in 1993. 4 top 5s, 12 top 10s, and 11th in the standings. But in '94, he announces that he will finally call it a career. In the last race of the season, Harry Gant runs a throwback paint scheme that looks exactly like the first iteration of the Skull Bandit he drove 13 years ago. Unfortunately though, he wasn't able to finish the race. He gets out of his car in pit lane, waves to the fans, and that was it. One of the most sensational NASCAR careers came to an end. At a time when you were expected to start in your late 20s, Harry started while knocking on the door of 40. He had a very narrow window of opportunity to achieve greatness, and he took advantage of every single second of it. He climbed to the highest peaks in the sport most could only dream of, and hobnobbed around with Hollywood stars. His team had several breakthroughs in mechanical and electronic ingenuity, and basically helped to write the NASCAR rulebook that we know today. Whether you call him the Bandit, Handsome Harry, Hollywood Harry, or Mr. September, every single person in the NASCAR nation immediately knows who you're talking about. And you know what? That's probably better than any trophy. Anyway, I'm Slapshoes, thanks for watching, and until next time, y'all take it easy.